The room was too bright for December, sunlight catching in the stained glass windows and splintering it into ribbons across the long mahogany table. The air hummed with holiday tension, but no one seemed inclined to acknowledge it, not with the will reading about to begin. I felt my fingers grow cold, clamped tightly around the edges of my chair, as if the wood itself could anchor me. My mother, Evelyn, was the picture of composure in her winter white suit, her lipstick as sharp as the angle of her jaw. My father, Richard, wore his habitual look of faint impatience, as though he had more important meetings waiting. Lucas, my older brother, rolled the chain of his inherited watch around his wrist, never quite meeting my eyes. Around us, the Miller clan had gathered in all their seasonal glory, aunts with fox fur collars, uncles with broad shoulders and polished shoes, cousins who had flown in for the spectacle as much as the inheritance. There was an undercurrent of perfume and expensive leather that made the whole scene feel like a curated tableau. I felt, as always, slightly out of place, a smudge on a family portrait. The lawyer, Mr. Whittaker, sat at the head of the table, hands folded atop a thick manila folder stamped with my grandfather's name. He waited until the last of the whispers faded, then cleared his throat and began to read. I found myself drifting, mind half caught between the reality of the room and a memory of Grandpa's last words to me, "Don't let them decide what you see." I never understood if he meant photography, or life, or maybe both. The will unfolded like an awards ceremony, gifts distributed with methodical precision. "Stock portfolios for the cousins, thank you, Uncle Walter," one of them breathed, as if on cue, "a vacation home for Aunt Linda, real estate and a bundle of municipal bonds for my parents." Lucas received the Miller family watch, prized, storied, heavy with expectation. He nodded at Mr. Whittaker, then at Dad, both of them wearing matching, unreadable smiles. And then, "To Ashley Miller, the sum of $10. I barely registered the words at first. They seemed too small to fit into the grand space of that office, like a typo or a trick of the light. But then I heard it, a snort from my father, brittle laughter from my mother, and the sound rolled through the room like a dropped plate, shattering the hush. My aunts pressed hands to their lips, some cousins exchanged glances, and Lucas looked at me with an expression I couldn't quite decipher, pity, maybe, or embarrassment on my behalf. The blood rushed to my face. I wanted to stand, to say something sharp, anything at all, but my tongue was a stone in my mouth. I remembered sitting in this same office as a child, legs swinging above the floor, drawing pictures on a legal pad while the adults discussed family business. It seemed impossible that I was here again, but now as the family joke. My parents laughed, openly, delightedly, as if this were some punchline they'd been waiting years to deliver. $10, my mother repeated, her voice carrying a brittle sweetness. "Well, at least you made the list, dear." Dad shook his head and said, a little too loudly, "Guess we know what rebellion gets you." There was a wave of chuckles from the other end of the table. It hurt more than I wanted it to, like stepping into snow in bare feet. I could see Lucas out of the corner of my eye, his fingers tightening on the watch chain. For a moment, I wondered if he would say something in my defense, but instead he offered a helpless half-smile, apology and resignation all tangled together. I tried to make myself small. I traced the lines of the wood table, focused on the way the sun hit the brass lamp in front of Mr. Whittaker, anything to keep from looking at the faces around me. But no amount of quiet could drown out the laughter, nor the sinking feeling that I had been set up to fail. It's strange, the details you remember when you're humiliated. The tick of the old clock on the sideboard. The scent of someone's peppermint hand lotion. The way the winter sun flickered as clouds passed outside. I thought of Grandpa then, how he used to sneak me extra cookies at Christmas and say, "Sometimes the smallest gift is the one that matters." I felt the sting in my eyes but blinked it away. No tears, not here. I reminded myself that I had come to this reading with no expectations, truly. Grandpa had always been kind, but he was private. I'd never believed he would challenge the weight of tradition for my sake. Still, the public nature of my dismissal, the way my parents reveled in it, was more than I had braced for. Mr. Whittaker paused, tapping the edge of his folder. The laughter was just starting to die down, replaced by the low hum of satisfied gossip. "There's one more thing," he said, voice calm but pointed, as if reminding everyone that this performance wasn't quite over. The room fell abruptly silent. I looked up, startled, as Mr. Whittaker's gaze settled on me. "There's an addendum addressed solely to Ashley," he continued, sliding a thick cream-colored envelope across the table. My name was written in Grandpa's shaky script. For a split second, no one moved. Then my mother let out a little noise, sharp as a tack. "Surely we're all entitled to know," she said, but Mr. Whittaker only shook his head. "Per Walter Miller's explicit instructions, this is to be read by Ashley in private." He pushed back from the table, inviting me to join him in the side office. I rose, hands unsteady, and felt the eyes of my family track every step I took. As I followed Mr. Whittaker, my mind whirled. Was this another joke? Some legal technicality? Or had Grandpa, quiet, shrewd, gentle in his own way, saved something for me after all? I thought of his old camera, the one he let me borrow when I was 12. I remembered his careful patience, the way he adjusted the strap around my neck, his eyes kind behind thick glasses. "Don't let them decide what you see," he'd said, and smiled in a way that made me believe, for a little while, that I belonged somewhere. Just before I left the main room, Lucas caught my eye. He didn't say a word, just lifted his chin a fraction, the gesture as close to support as he ever managed. It would have to do. Mr. Whittaker held the office door for me. As it closed behind us, the muffled sounds of the family faded, replaced by the hush of carpet and books and dust motes in the light. The envelope waited for me on the desk, heavier than I would have thought possible. In that moment, I realized, every story has a turning point, but you never see it coming until you're already halfway through. Maybe this was mine. The envelope felt heavier than I expected, as if all the family history and every unspoken word Grandpa never shared had been sealed inside with the wax. My name, spelled out in his uneven handwriting, seemed to shimmer in the dim light of Mr. Whittaker's office. For a long moment, I just stared at it, afraid to move, afraid to break whatever spell kept the past and the present from colliding too hard. Mr. Whittaker stood quietly nearby, giving me a gentle, understanding nod. He was a man who dealt in other people's endings and beginnings, who understood that a letter like this could tip a life in one direction or another. "Take your time, Ashley," he said softly. "I'll wait outside." He closed the door with a quiet click, leaving me alone in a cocoon of shadows and city light. My hand shook a little as I reached for the letter, tracing the ridges of the wax seal. I took a deep breath. Dad's old warning floated through my mind, "Dreams don't build legacies, Ashley." How many times had I heard that? As if loving something or wanting something that wasn't already printed on Miller family letterhead was a kind of betrayal. I pressed my thumb against the seal and heard it crack. The sound seemed unnaturally loud in the hush of that office. The first thing I saw was a single line at the top. "I'm sorry about the scene, kiddo. I needed you to see the truth when it mattered." I swallowed hard and unfolded the rest of the pages. Grandpa's handwriting wandered, sometimes neat, sometimes almost illegible where his hand had grown tired. His words, though, were crystal clear, gentle, thoughtful, sometimes wry, just like him. He explained the $10. "It was never meant as an insult, Ashley," he wrote. "It was a decoy, a shield. The world sometimes needs to see you brought low before it can stand to see you rise. He described how he'd watched my parents and the rest of the family jockey for position, how he'd seen the way I was treated as an afterthought. I wanted them to show their true faces, he wrote. They needed to reveal themselves, and you needed to know who would laugh when they thought you were powerless. I felt something twist in my chest, a familiar ache, but also a kind of vindication. For so long, I had suspected my family didn't really see me at all. Now I understood that Grandpa had seen everything. The next paragraph shifted. Ashley, he wrote, there is another will. The true one. You are the sole heir of the Miller Creative Trust. I've left you the gallery on Beacon Street, the penthouse above it, and control of the trust itself. There's a key inside this envelope, and instructions for Mr. Whitaker to help you claim what is yours. I did not want the others to know. Not yet. Not until you were ready. The words blurred as my vision stung. For a long time I just sat with the letter trembling in my hands, overwhelmed by a mixture of shock and relief, gratitude and disbelief. The gallery. The penthouse. The trust. Grandpa had built it all in secret for me, not because I was the obedient child, not because I fit the mold, but because I hadn't. Tucked between the pages, I found a small brass key tied with a strip of old leather. Its weight in my palm was real, undeniable. Beneath it, a final line. They left too soon, Ashley. They always do. Let them. The real story is yours to write now. I let out a shaky breath, trying to absorb it all. My life had shifted in a matter of minutes, from humiliation in a crowded room to the quiet, dizzying responsibility of a legacy meant for me alone. The room around me felt both smaller and larger at once, like the walls were receding to make space for something I hadn't dared to imagine. I pressed the letter to my chest and let myself close my eyes for a moment, listening to the muted hum of Boston beyond the windows. Somewhere down on the street, a horn honked, a siren wailed and faded. The world kept turning, entirely unaware that my axis had tilted. What would I do now? Should I walk back into the main room, wave the letter in the air, confront my parents with the truth of Grandpa's choice? The image flashed through my mind, my mother's painted smile faltering, my father's confident mask slipping, Lucas's eyes wide in shock. I could almost taste the satisfaction, but it faded quickly, replaced by something deeper. Was that what Grandpa would have wanted? Or had he trusted me to be better, to find a way forward that was mine alone? I remembered Grandpa's warning, words he'd offered with a gentle squeeze of my shoulder after my first gallery rejection. Truth always costs more than you think, Ash. Sometimes it costs you everything, but it's worth it. Back then, I thought he was talking about art. Now I knew he meant life. I smoothed the letter out on the desk and reread the closing lines. For the first time since I'd entered the Miller family law office, I felt something close to hope. There was a future waiting for me, one I could shape, instead of inherit by default. The fear didn't disappear, but it found a companion, a flicker of resolve. With one last look at Grandpa's signature, I tucked the key and the letter into my coat pocket. When I opened the office door, Mr. Whitaker stood waiting, his face kind but unreadable. I nodded at him, wordless. He seemed to understand. As I walked past the main conference room, the laughter had faded, replaced by the scratch of pens and the rustle of coats. No one looked up. I stepped out into the hallway, the key cold in my fist, a new story beginning inside me. Should I tell them? Or should I keep this secret, let it grow until I was ready? As I moved through the maze of glass and polished wood, I realized this was a choice only I could make. No one in that law office suspected the world had just shifted beneath their feet. They carried on as if the story was already written, every line scripted and rehearsed, with each of us reciting our parts. I walked back into the main room, holding my face as still as glass, the envelope and key buried deep in my coat pocket. Outside the windows, dusk had started to gather, turning the snowy streets of Boston a muted gray-blue. The city lights were just beginning to blink on, casting their soft halos on the sidewalk, a kind of silent encouragement I hadn't known I needed. The atmosphere had shifted, but not because of anything I'd said or done. The will reading was over, the performance had ended. People began to talk again, their voices pitched low and safe, avoiding anything that might stir the surface. Aunts compared hotel amenities and dinner reservations, uncles checked their phones for messages. My parents, though, were waiting for me with a special kind of attention, the kind reserved for family business and, occasionally, family disappointment. "Back so soon?" my mother asked, arching one eyebrow with a practiced gentleness that made her look almost sympathetic. "I hope it wasn't anything too disappointing, dear." I shrugged, not trusting my voice, and forced a small smile. "Just some old paperwork," I said. The lie sat heavy on my tongue, but I was already learning that truth, like art, needed careful timing. Dad joined in, a glimmer of amusement in his eyes. "Well, at least you can frame that $10 check," he said, his tone light but edged. "Maybe put it up in that little apartment of yours. A real Miller heirloom." His laughter didn't carry as far this time, but a couple of relatives snickered in agreement. I noticed Lucas, standing just behind them, hands in his pockets, gaze sliding away whenever I caught his eye. Lucas had once told me, not unkindly, "You'll never belong here unless you play by their rules." I remembered the conversation, years ago, after another family dinner where my jokes fell flat and my opinions were met with tight smiles. At the time, I thought maybe I could change myself, maybe I could learn the script. But today I realized the script was written for someone else. I tried to keep my expression neutral, picking at a stray thread on my sleeve while my parents continued their quiet performance. My mother adjusted her necklace, the gesture so practiced it looked choreographed. "You know," she said, lowering her voice just enough for only me and Dad to hear, "sometimes life has a funny way of teaching us lessons." I bit back a reply. There was nothing left to say, not now, not here, not when everyone else was waiting for the next bit of gossip to fall from the sky. Instead, I nodded and excused myself, murmuring something about catching an early train. Nobody stopped me, no one asked if I was all right. In the Miller family, you learn to see yourself out. Lucas caught up with me at the elevator, but he didn't speak. He just pressed the button, glanced at me sideways, and gave a half-smile that was equal parts apology and resignation. When the doors opened, I stepped in alone. The city's cold hit me as soon as I stepped out onto the sidewalk. I drew my coat tighter, feeling the letter and key pressed against my ribs. For a moment, I stood on the curb and looked up at the tall buildings, all their windows glowing against the dusk. Boston was always beautiful in winter, the kind of beautiful that felt honest, bracing and raw and just a little bit lonely. The humiliation from the law office lingered in my chest, a slow ache, but I let myself feel it instead of pushing it away. There's a strange kind of power in letting your heart hurt openly, in knowing the worst has happened and you're still standing. I thought about Grandpa's words, "Don't let them decide what you see," and I wondered what he'd say if he saw me now, carrying his secret through the dark. A light dusting of snow had started to fall, sparkling under the city lamps. My breath curled in the air, visible proof that I was here, real, unbroken. I let myself walk for a while with no real destination, letting the noise of the city fill the hollow space left by my family's laughter. After a few blocks, I ducked into a small coffee shop, just to get warm. The windows fogged over quickly, the inside packed with students and office workers thawing out after a long day. I ordered a tea, my hand still shaking a bit as I paid, and found a quiet table in the corner. The key sat heavy in my pocket. I turned it over and over in my palm beneath the table, grounding myself in its solid weight. For the first time, I let myself really imagine what it might mean to be the heir of something all my own. The gallery, the penthouse, the trust, words that felt both impossible and electric. I wondered how I would even begin to step into that world, or if I was meant to at all. My phone buzzed, jerking me from my thoughts. For a second, I thought it might be Lucas, maybe an apology or a joke to break the tension. But it was a text from Mr. Whitaker. Let's talk. Tomorrow. Just you. I read the message twice, then again, trying to puzzle out its tone. Was it good news or bad? Had he changed his mind? I took a long breath and sipped my tea, watching the world outside blur into streaks of gold and white. When I finally left the shop, the streets were quiet and bright under the streetlights. I slipped my hand into my coat, feeling the letter and the key safe and close. Whatever happened next, at least these things were truly mine. As I walked the last few blocks home, I thought about the future, unwritten, uncertain, and, for the first time in a long while, just a little bit open. The key felt almost mythical in my palm, heavy with all the things Grandpa had never said aloud. Its brass surface was worn smooth in places, the leather loop soft from years of being carried, not by me, but by hands that had built something out of both stubbornness and hope. I turned it over and over as I made my way down Beacon Street, the city biting cold against my cheeks. There was a thin crust of snow on the stone steps, already melting into gray slush, and the January air was sharp enough to make my eyes water. Beacon Street was a place that had always held a certain magic for me. Even as a teenager, I would take the long route home from school just to walk past the old buildings, their facades dignified and slightly tired, standing like quiet witnesses to the years. There was always one address in particular, a brick-fronted building with wide windows and ironwork details, that drew me in. I used to pause on the sidewalk and imagine what it might be like to belong there, to have a space for my art and my thoughts, a place that was really, truly mine. I arrived a few minutes early, heart pounding beneath my scarf. Mr. Whitaker was already waiting at the curb, his overcoat buttoned up tight, a rare smile breaking through his lawyerly reserve. "Morning, Ashley," he said, offering a nod that felt almost conspiratorial. "Ready?" I tried to match his confidence, but my voice shook a little. "As I'll ever be." He gestured toward the building, the key in my hand suddenly feeling enormous. "Let's go see what Walter left you." The building manager met us in the entryway, bustling and efficient, keys jangling from a ring at her hip. "You must be Miss Miller," she said, giving me a once-over that was more curious than judgmental. "Your grandfather was a good tenant, quiet, but he kept everything in perfect order." She unlocked the door, then stepped aside. Mr. Whitaker motioned for me to do the honors. My hand shook as I fitted the brass key into the lock. It slid home with a satisfying click, and just like that, the door swung open. Inside, the gallery was filled with a gentle morning light, dust swirling in the beams that fell across polished wood floors. The space was both grand and a bit neglected, white walls lined with black and white photographs, most of them my own. I stopped in the entry, stunned. Some were images I'd taken as a teenager, lost or forgotten, others were recent pieces, carefully matted and framed. A few I recognized only from memory, pictures I'd sold at local shows, ones I never knew Grandpa had bought. I walked from photo to photo, my breath coming in little bursts of disbelief. Each image was labeled, the handwriting unmistakably his. Ashley, Central Square, 2012. Beacon Hill in Snow, 2017. There was a quiet pride in the way they'd been arranged, no grand statements, just a slow accumulation of years and effort. It was like stepping into an archive of everything I'd ever tried to say about the world. Mr. Whitaker let me wander for a while. When I finally looked back at him, he was watching with a faint smile. He kept track of your work. All of it. Even when no one else was paying attention. I found myself blinking hard, struggling to steady my voice. I had no idea. He nodded. Walter wanted this place for you, Ashley. It was never about the family's expectations. He said you saw things the rest of them couldn't. The building manager led us through a back hallway, past a security guard who greeted us with a polite nod, and up a narrow staircase to the penthouse. The stairs creaked underfoot, a comforting sound, honest and real. The penthouse took my breath away. The ceilings were high and painted white, sunlight pouring through wide windows and pooling on a floor scuffed by decades of living. There were built-in shelves lined with old books, some of them mine, some of them Grandpa's, and a battered oak desk that faced the city skyline. Off to the side, a small kitchen and a bedroom with just enough space for dreams that didn't fit anywhere else. On the desk, a stack of folders waited, legal papers, banking documents, lists of passwords and instructions, all organized in Mr. Whitaker's precise hand. He explained the details quietly, guiding me through title transfers and the transition of control over the Miller Creative Trust. I nodded when required, but it felt almost abstract, like watching someone else's life unfold. In the middle of the desk sat a small black box. I opened it with trembling fingers and found a single photograph, Grandpa as a young man, camera slung around his neck, standing beside a battered bicycle on a dusty road. He looked straight at the lens, expression serious but not unkind. I ran my thumb over the image, feeling the texture of the old paper. Your grandfather took that picture himself, Mr. Whitaker said, his voice softer now. He always wanted you to know where you came from. The realization hit me then, all at once, the scale of what Grandpa had prepared for me. This wasn't just about money or property. It was about faith, legacy, and an understanding that had run deeper than words. I was the inheritor of not just a gallery or a trust, but a lifetime of silent encouragement and secret hope. Overwhelmed, I let myself sink down onto the penthouse floor, legs folding beneath me. The letter and key lay in my lap, and I pressed my palms to my eyes, letting the tears come. Not the hot, stinging tears of humiliation I'd shed in the law office, but the quiet ones that came with gratitude and a kind of exhausted relief. For so long, I'd believed I was alone in wanting something different. But here was proof, real and solid. Grandpa had always seen me, always believed. I stayed there for a long time, letting the sun warm my face, the city stretching out below in all its restless, indifferent glory. The silence of the penthouse was comforting, not empty, but waiting. Eventually, I gathered myself and stood. I tucked the photo of Grandpa carefully into my coat pocket alongside the letter and the key, feeling their combined weight steadying me. I walked through the rooms, touching the spines of old books, tracing the frames of my photographs. I wondered how I would ever fill this space with the right kind of life, how I would rise to what Grandpa had left in my care. How would I run a gallery, manage a trust, be the steward of a legacy I hadn't even known was mine? And what would my family do if they ever found out what Grandpa had really given me? The questions pressed in, but for the first time in days, they didn't feel like threats. They felt like doors, closed for now, but not locked. As I looked out over the city, the key still warm from my hand, I whispered a quiet thank you to the man who had believed in me when no one else would. I had no idea what the future held, but I knew I wouldn't walk into it alone. If you had told me last week I'd own a gallery on Beacon Street, I'd have laughed as hard as anyone else in my family. But as I stood in the afternoon light pouring through the high windows of the Miller Gallery, the laughter caught somewhere in my throat and refused to come out. The space was half chaos, half potential, a canvas in the middle of being stretched. Movers shifted heavy boxes of files and art, contractors muttered over paint chips, and every so often, I caught a flash of my own reflection in a polished frame, looking a little dazed. The penthouse above was still a sanctuary, cluttered now with folders and to-do lists, coffee mugs crowding the edges of the old oak desk. My phone buzzed every few minutes, an email from Mr. Whitaker with a document to sign, texts from old college friends. Are you okay? Did something happen at the will reading? I replied in vague snippets, unable to explain even to myself what had changed. I wandered through the gallery, letting my fingers skim the tops of the frames, dust motes swirling in the light. Some of the photographs I recognized from my first tentative attempts at art, soft focus city scenes, children in a park, old women sitting on stoops. There were landscapes, too, Beacon Hill in the fog, the Charles River iced over, a crumbling brick wall I'd shot the summer after my high school graduation. I stopped in front of one, a blurry shot of a bicycle leaning against a fence, a shadow just out of frame. I remembered being 16, too shy to ask permission, so I'd snap the picture and run away laughing. There were dozens of these images, all carefully preserved, matted, and labeled in Grandpa's handwriting. I realized, with a warmth that surprised me, that he must have bought some of them at my early student shows, or maybe from the galleries that had let me hang my work for free. The thought made my throat tighten, a kind of grief, a kind of pride. Mr. Whitaker found me there, shuffling through a stack of paperwork with practiced ease. "You'll need to sign these," he said, laying out a series of documents, title transfers, trust authorizations, city permits. He was patient, explaining each step, but I caught the gleam in his eye when he said, in the end, "Ashley, this is your gallery. You're in charge. The rest is just legal noise." I hesitated, pen hovering above the line. "What if I make a mess of it?" I asked, my voice quieter than I intended. He smiled, not unkindly. "Then you'll clean it up and try again. That's all any of us ever do." He left me to finish the signatures. When I checked my phone again, I saw a missed call from Lucas. The message was brief, his tone carefully casual. "Hey, just checking in. Figured you'd want to talk about, the whole $10 thing. Dad's still laughing. Call me back?" There was an edge beneath the words, a hint of curiosity and maybe something like suspicion. I texted back, "Busy, let's catch up soon," and left it at that. Later, the gallery staff arrived, a handful of people who had managed the place for years under Grandpa's guidance. They looked at me with open curiosity, some with uncertainty, some with the forced cheer of people facing an unexpected new boss. The eldest among them, Mrs. Jenkins, wore a scarf with purple flowers and shook my hand warmly. "We always wondered who'd take over," she said, eyes searching mine. "Glad it's someone who knows what these walls mean." I did my best to smile. "I'm learning," I told her. "If you have any advice, I'll take it." As we walked through the gallery, they pointed out practical matters, a leaky pipe in the storage room, a troublesome thermostat, a favorite cafe down the block for coffee runs. The conversations were full of detail but free of judgment. Still, I caught a few sidelong glances, the unspoken question, did I really belong here? Was I up to the task? Back upstairs, I found myself staring out the penthouse window, Boston sprawling below in the soft winter dusk. I thought of all the times Mom had said, "We don't have artists in this family. We have winners." She'd meant it as encouragement, maybe, or as a warning. I'd spent years wondering which side of the divide I was meant to land on. Now, with the gallery and Grandpa's trust in my hands, the line felt less important. I pulled out my old sketchbook, the pages soft from use, and started jotting ideas, what kind of show I might organize, which pieces I'd hang, how I could open the space to new artists. My hand shook at first, then steadied as ideas began to flow. For every burst of inspiration, a flicker of nerves followed. What if I failed? What if the family found out? What if I let Grandpa down? But beneath all of it was a pulse of something new, a quiet sense that maybe, just maybe, I could do this. As night settled, the gallery emptied and the staff drifted home. The building was silent except for the hum of the old heater and the distant honk of taxis on Beacon Street. I wandered through the rooms one last time, flipping off lights, pausing in front of my oldest photograph, the bicycle, the shadow. In that moment, I remembered my first real art show, the one that barely anyone attended. I'd been crushed, ready to pack it all in, but Grandpa had shown up just before closing, clapping louder than anyone, telling me with quiet certainty, "Proud doesn't begin to cover it, Ash." Alone in the penthouse, I laid out the documents and the key on the desk. I let the silence settle. Then, with both hands pressed flat on the wood, I made a vow: I would honor Grandpa's trust. I would find a way to belong, even if I had to invent it myself. There's a saying I heard once: sometimes, the life you want begins when you stop waiting for someone else to give you permission. I wrote it in the margin of my sketchbook, underlining it twice. Just as I was ready to turn in, my laptop chimed with a new email, subject line, "Press inquiry, change at Miller Gallery?" The message was short but direct: "We heard something changed at Miller Gallery. Any comment?" For a moment, panic rose. I hadn't even begun to think about how the outside world would react. But then I smiled, just a little, and started to type a reply. Gossip travels faster than snowmelt on Beacon Street. I learned this before noon on Monday, when my phone started to vibrate with the force of a small earthquake. By the time I finished my first cup of coffee in the Miller Gallery office, the world seemed to know, or at least suspect, that something big had changed behind the old brick walls. It started with whispers among the staff. I overheard Mrs. Jenkins talking to one of the junior curators near the coat closet. "She's Walter's granddaughter, right?" I thought the family didn't care for the arts. The younger woman shrugged, glancing at me as I passed. There was no malice in her eyes, only curiosity. Still, I felt the weight of being observed, the scrutiny of people trying to piece together how someone like me, someone so unlike the rest of the Miller clan, could possibly end up in charge. Emails poured in from local art bloggers. News alerts blinked across my laptop: legacy in flux, Miller Gallery changes hands after will reading. My name appeared, sometimes spelled wrong, attached to speculation about secret inheritances and dramatic family rifts. The gallery phone rang constantly, every call another pebble tossed into already restless water. In the midst of all this, my family group chat erupted. It started innocently enough, an aunt sharing a photo of her cat in a bow tie, but soon shifted. "Did you see the news? Ashley's running the gallery? What happened at the will reading?" My parents didn't reply right away. Instead, Mom called directly, her tone as crisp as the winter air. "Ashley, are you making a fool of us?" she demanded, skipping any greeting. "The family is already getting questions. Why are you encouraging this circus?" I took a breath, willing my voice to remain calm. "Mom, I'm not encouraging anything. I'm just doing what Grandpa asked." There was a pause, just long enough for me to picture her pursed lips and pinched brow. "Your grandfather had his eccentricities. Don't let his impulses ruin what's left of our reputation." Dad chimed in on the chat later, more indirect but no less sharp: "Secrets never stay buried in this family. If you're hiding something, best to come clean now." His message sat beneath a forwarded news article, as if he hoped a little shame might prompt a confession. Lucas, for his part, texted me separately. Did you know about this? When did Grandpa talk to you? Should I be worried? I stared at the screen, unsure how to reply. Lucas had always wanted to believe the best of me, but his loyalty had a habit of crumbling under family pressure. I sat back, it's complicated. Let's talk soon, hoping to buy myself time. Back in the gallery, staff gathered in clusters, their conversations pausing when I entered the room. Some greeted me warmly, others with cautious neutrality. A few wore expressions of quiet skepticism, as if waiting for me to reveal myself as either a fraud or a miracle. Mr. Whitaker arrived with a stack of folders and a knowing smile. "Heard you're making headlines," he said, not unkindly. "You have two choices, ride the wave or get dragged under. My advice? Plan a relaunch. Make the story yours before someone else writes it for you." The idea terrified me. The thought of standing up in front of family, staff, critics, everyone who'd ever doubted me, and claiming the gallery as my own felt impossible. But the alternative, shrinking from the truth, seemed far worse. I pictured Grandpa, steady and quiet, telling me to look through the lens and not flinch. So, I started to plan. With Mr. Whitaker's help, I drafted invitations for my first solo exhibition at the gallery. I chose a date, selected pieces, some of my oldest work, some new, a few from Grandpa's collection. I added the names of every family member, even the ones who'd laughed loudest at the Will reading. I signed each invite myself. Ashley Miller, gallery director. Sending those invitations was an act of faith and defiance. As I watched the emails leave my outbox, my heart raced and my hands shook. I told myself that courage didn't mean a lack of fear, it just meant not letting fear call the shots. Within an hour, my mother texted back. "We'll see you there." For words, impossible to interpret, threat, promise, challenge, or some combination of all three. That night, as the city pressed cold and bright against the gallery windows, I stood in the empty main hall and rehearsed my speech. I stumbled over the opening lines, my voice small in the echoing space. But with every repetition, a little hope crept in. I could picture Grandpa in the back row, hands folded, nodding with that quiet pride he reserved for those who dared to try. The world outside was restless, and my family was on the march, but inside these walls, I was beginning to believe that I might actually belong. The gallery felt haunted by expectation. It was the night before my first solo show as owner, and the Miller Gallery was a living thing, every corner humming with nervous energy, every shaft of light catching motes of dust that danced like old ghosts. The snow outside had returned, flurrying across Beacon Street, blanketing the stoop in clean white. Inside, the air smelled of fresh paint, coffee, and the faint tang of printer ink from last-minute brochures. I moved from room to room, checking the placement of each photograph. Some of the artists were still there, fussing over frames or adjusting lighting, eyes darting to me for silent approval. The staff moved with purpose, but there was a quiet tension beneath the surface, as if everyone was waiting to see if the new Miller would rise or stumble. I tried to steady my hands as I adjusted a piece near the entrance, a cityscape I'd shot years ago, the skyline blurred by rain. It struck me how many of the images on these walls were small moments I'd never expected anyone to notice. Now, they hung as testaments to a life lived outside the family's rules. Grandpa's mantra echoed in my mind, "If you shine your own light, the shadows get smaller." I wondered if he'd ever felt this kind of fear, or if courage had simply been something he wore beneath his coat, ready for nights like this. Lucas arrived just as the last of the artists were leaving. He didn't text first, just appeared in the doorway, his coat dusted with snow. "Place looks good," he said, eyes scanning the room. "Didn't know you could pull something like this off." There was a tightness to his words, but also a reluctant admiration. I smiled, keeping my distance. It's not finished yet, I replied. And it's not just mine. It's everyone's. Lucas wandered the gallery, pausing in front of the $10 check I'd placed, still unframed, on a stool in the center of the main hall. He raised an eyebrow. You're not really going to hang that, are you? I met his gaze, feeling old insecurities jostle for space with a stubborn new resolve. It's part of the story, I said. People should see where it started. He shook his head, a laugh slipping out. Don't expect them to clap, Ash. Not everyone here wants you to win. I heard the warning beneath his words, years of family dinners where applause was conditional, affection something you earned with obedience. For a moment, I wanted to ask him if he'd ever felt as out of place as I did, but I let the silence hang between us instead. After Lucas left, the staff finished their work and trickled out into the cold. Mr. Whitaker lingered, a rare looseness to his posture. He watched as I framed the $10 check, mounting it in the very center of the gallery, beneath the brightest spotlight. He came to stand beside me. Bold move, he said, the corners of his mouth twitching upward. Feels right, I answered, my voice barely above a whisper. If they're going to talk, let them talk about the truth. Mr. Whitaker nodded. This is your night, Ashley. Not theirs. Remember that. I nodded, grateful for the steadiness in his presence. Still, doubt swirled in the empty halls after he left. I wandered the gallery alone, pausing to touch the cool glass of a photograph, feeling both smaller and larger than I'd ever been. I drifted back to a memory, walking through these halls with Grandpa, long before I ever imagined inheriting them. The gallery was closed that day, the floors echoing under our footsteps. He had shown me how light pooled near the windows, how art could make silence feel alive. Someday, he said, this could be your place. All you have to do is want it enough. Now, with the weight of the key in my pocket and the promise of someday blooming into now, I tried to channel his quiet confidence. I rehearsed my speech aloud, voice trembling, then growing steadier with each repetition. I talked about art and legacy, about seeing and being seen, about making a space for people who didn't always fit. The snow outside softened the sounds of the city, muffling the world so the gallery seemed suspended in its own hush. For the first time since the will reading, I felt hope standing shoulder to shoulder with my nerves. As I gathered my things and prepared to leave, the silence was broken by a sudden rattling at the front doors. My heart leapt, too early for the public, too late for staff. Through the frosted glass, I saw the outlines of my parents, standing close together, their posture unmistakable even in shadow. Tomorrow, the doors would open for everyone. Tonight, the past and future waited on the other side, determined to be let in. The first person through the gallery doors was my mother, every inch the Miller matriarch, pearl necklace, perfect lipstick, a smile so frosty it seemed to chill the air. She swept past the entryway, her eyes scanning the walls and the crowd, taking in every detail but offering nothing of herself. Dad followed, jaw tight, wearing his favorite navy suit and the stony look that he reserved for both funerals and, apparently, his daughter's opening night. Behind them, Lucas arrived with his hands shoved deep in his pockets, shoulders squared as if bracing for a winter storm. The rest of the family trickled in, aunts and uncles, their greetings clipped and polite, cousins, some barely looking at me, and a handful of family friends who had once watched me finger paint in their living rooms and now murmured awkward encouragement as they accepted flutes of sparkling cider from the servers. The Miller Gallery was filled with life. Critics in black turtlenecks debated at the far end, local journalists checked their notes, and clusters of young artists hovered near their work, beaming when anyone paused to look. Music played softly, glasses clinked, hors d'oeuvres disappeared as quickly as they were passed. Still, there was a pulse of tension beneath the surface, as if everyone was waiting to see what sort of mess the new heir might make. Mom's gaze swept over the $10 check, now framed and lit at the center of the main hall. Her smile didn't falter, but the lines around her mouth deepened. "Bold," she said under her breath, just loud enough for Dad to hear. He only grunted, moving on to shake hands with a gallery board member. Old friends approached, offering hugs and vague platitudes. "So proud of you, Ashley, your grandfather would have loved this," but their eyes flickered toward my parents, as if seeking permission to approve. A few relatives lingered by the coat rack, their whispers trailing after me as I passed. I tried to keep moving, weaving through the crowd, but every step felt choreographed and stiff. I paused near a cluster of critics, hoping for a brief escape. Instead, I caught a snippet of conversation, raw, almost naive. "But there's a sincerity you can't fake. Isn't this the one who only got $10 from the will? Makes for good press." Their words stung more than I cared to admit. I found myself questioning every choice. Was the lighting too bright, the music too soft? Was the check too obvious, my speech too rehearsed? I was sweating, despite the air conditioning. Dad's old motto echoed in my head, "Never let them see you sweat." Before I could retreat to the kitchen, a journalist intercepted me, recorder already in hand. "Ashley, can you comment on the rumors? Did your grandfather really leave you everything? Was the $10 inheritance a joke? How did it feel, stepping into this role so suddenly?" I opened my mouth, but the words tangled together. Mr. Whitaker appeared at my side, his presence calm and steady. He caught my eye, offering the smallest nod. "Ashley, it's time." I followed him to the makeshift stage at the center of the main hall, my heart pounding so hard I wondered if the microphone would pick it up. The room quieted as I stepped forward, every face turned toward me, family, staff, friends, strangers. I took a breath, let it out, and tried to find my own voice. "I want to thank everyone for coming tonight. This gallery has meant so much to my family for generations, and to me, it's meant something different. Art is about seeing, and being seen. It's about daring to show the world what matters to you, even if others don't always understand." I hesitated, then pressed on. "My grandfather taught me that value isn't always measured by numbers, or by applause. Sometimes it's measured by what you build, by what you share, and by the courage it takes to keep going even when people laugh." Tonight, I'm proud to share not just my own work, but the work of young artists who remind me of who I was, and who I still am, sometimes, nervous, hopeful, and a little bit brave. There was a long, quiet moment after I finished. I looked out over the crowd, some faces thoughtful, some skeptical, a few openly moved. Dad's expression was unreadable, carved from stone. Mom leaned in close as I stepped off the stage, her voice barely a whisper, "Don't think this changes anything." I didn't answer. Instead, I made my way through the crowd to where a group of the young artists stood together, glowing with pride, their eyes shining with possibility. In their excitement, I saw myself, not the version my family tried to sculpt, but the one Grandpa had quietly encouraged all along. The music swelled, and conversation resumed. I stood for a while, letting the buzz wash over me, letting the fear settle into something quieter. The opening night wasn't perfect, but it was real. I had survived, and in the faces of those young artists, I saw a future that was bigger than any single show, or any single check. The gallery was still buzzing after the last guest drifted out, but every compliment clung to me with the weight of expectation, as if each word was a subtle test. The echoes of laughter and chatter hung in the air like perfume, fading slowly, replaced by the soft clinks of staff collecting glasses and the low hum of the city outside. I stood by the windows for a long moment, forehead pressed against the cool glass, watching headlights slide across snow-packed Beacon Street. You're only as good as your last show, Grandpa used to joke when I was little, tossing me a wink over the edge of his book. I never really understood the pressure then, the way one moment of success could feel like a thin shield against a lifetime of doubt. Now, it settled on my shoulders, light and heavy at once. Lucas lingered in the main hall as the staff cleaned up, hands tucked into his pockets, gaze softer than it had been in years. Didn't think you'd actually pull it off, he admitted when we finally caught each other's eye. Guess I was wrong. I managed a real smile for him, the kind that didn't cost me anything. You weren't the only one. Most days, I wasn't so sure either. He shrugged, glancing at the framed $10 check on the wall. They'll still talk, you know. That's what Millers do. Let them, I said, my voice steadier than I felt. I'm learning to listen less. Lucas's mouth twitched, almost a grin. You ever need backup, let me know. Maybe we'll both surprise them. Dad had slipped out long before the speeches ended, citing an early meeting, though I doubted he'd have stayed even if the mayor himself had shown up. Mom paused on her way out, eyes unreadable, lips pressed into a thin, silent line. She didn't speak, not congratulations, not advice, not even the soft sting of her usual warnings. Her silence was colder than any rebuke. The staff gathered near the entry, jackets in hand, faces lit by the soft glow of the chandeliers. Mrs. Jenkins patted my shoulder. You did good, Ashley. This place feels different already. Another staffer, younger and less certain, nodded and offered a quiet congrats, before hurrying out into the night. A few critics lingered by the coat rack, their voices a low rumble of praise and reservation. One shook my hand, eyes sharp but not unkind. Not a bad debut. Keep us guessing. I promised myself I would. Eventually, the gallery emptied, the hush settling over the rooms like a warm blanket. I made my way to the office, pausing to gather stray glasses, stacking programs on the front desk. The quiet now was different, less anxious, more peaceful, as if the building itself was exhaling. I sat at my desk, the stack of congratulations and second guesses swirling in my mind. Hope and doubt did their usual dance. Had I done enough? Was it too much? What came next? I glanced down, noticing a new object nestled among the paperwork. Grandpa's old fountain pen, polished black, gold band glinting. I picked it up, feeling the familiar shape, the weight that matched the memory of his hand guiding mine across a sketchpad. I smiled, letting gratitude soften the sharp edge of worry. A soft knock sounded at the open door. Mr. Whitaker entered, a thick envelope in his hands, his smile quiet but certain. You did well, he said, handing me the envelope. As of tonight, the gallery and the Miller Creative Trust are yours, officially, legally, irreversibly. No one can challenge that now. The finality hit me with a strange, comforting force. This wasn't just a role I was filling for a night, it was a legacy I could shape, or even redefine. I thanked him, voice catching slightly, and he rested a steady hand on my shoulder before leaving me alone in the office. For a long while, I sat there, running Grandpa's pen between my fingers, letting the events of the night settle. The gallery outside was silent, lit only by the moon through tall windows. I thought about the years spent feeling out of place at family parties, the small failures and rare triumphs, the secret hope I'd never let go of. I thought about the young artists I'd met tonight, their wide eyes and trembling hands, so much like mine. My laptop pinged, the sound jarring in the hush. An email, no subject, no sender. The body of the message was brief, anonymous, and sharp as a slap. You'll never deserve this. For a moment, my breath caught. Fear and anger surged, but I forced myself to breathe through it. I remembered Grandpa's voice, warm and steady, What others see doesn't define you, Ash. What you do with what you're given, that's your measure. I closed the email, refusing to let it take root. Instead, I uncapped Grandpa's fountain pen and began jotting notes for tomorrow, a thank you to the staff, ideas for the next show, a line for the young artists I wanted to mentor. The gallery was mine. The legacy was mine. And whatever the world decided, I knew the only way forward was to keep showing up, to keep shining my own light, and let the shadows shrink behind me. I thought inheriting power would make me feel strong, untouchable, even. Mostly, it makes me feel watched. The gallery's walls feel closer now, their shadows heavier, as if the eyes of every ancestor are peering out from behind the gilded frames. On Beacon Street, winter deepens, leaving salt and dirty snowbanks outside the door, and inside, the chill is less about the temperature than about everything left unsaid. Emails come in faster than snowflakes, press requests, vendor invoices, questions from staff, anxious queries from board members who never bothered to remember my name before. Headlines ripple through the art world, new era or new mistake? Heiress reshapes Miller Gallery. My phone vibrates in my pocket so often that I'm half convinced I can feel it even when it isn't there. At night in the penthouse, I hear echoes of my childhood, Mom's voice on a dark staircase, warning, careful, Ashley. People are always waiting for you to fail. I used to think it was just her way of keeping me safe, but now I wonder if it was her way of making sure I never reached too high. I decided, against every expectation, maybe even my own, to break the mold. I called a meeting with the staff and announced the launch of a new artist residency, an open application, focusing on young, overlooked talent, artists who reminded me of the girl I'd once been. The idea had been simmering since the night of the show, sparked by those hopeful eyes in the crowd. The reaction was immediate, and divided. Some staff cheered, a few even clapped, but the older guard sat stony-faced. In the boardroom, one of the longest-tenured managers crossed her arms and said, "This isn't how Walter did things." Another warned, "Patrons expect tradition, not experiments." Their voices carried an old resentment. I was an outsider, wearing the title but not the skin. Tension thickened as the meeting wore on. Raised voices, sharp sighs, someone threatening to resign if the gallery lost its standards. I kept my voice even, though my hands trembled under the table. Art changes, I told them. If we don't change with it, we become a mausoleum, not a gallery. The words sounded braver than I felt, but they seemed to land. Eventually, the room quieted, a fragile truce forming as people shuffled out, some with wary glances, others with the first flickers of new hope. Back in my office, I scrolled through emails, half dreading the next crisis. Lucas's name popped up, subject line, "Heads up. I was wrong about you. But you better be sure you're right about this. The family's watching, and so is everyone else. Call if you need a buffer." A mix of gratitude and nerves curled in my chest. For all his teasing, Lucas understood what it meant to carry the family's expectations. I typed a quick reply, "Thanks. I'll let you know," and left it at that. The phone rang again. This time, it was Mom. She didn't bother with pleasantries. "Don't ruin what's left of our name," she said, voice cold but edged with something like fear. "You're making choices you can't take back." There was a pause, then a sigh. "But it's your signature on the door now." I waited for more, maybe a hint of pride, but the line clicked dead. I spent the rest of the afternoon helping the new residents move in. The first artist, a young woman named Rachel, arrived with a battered suitcase and eyes wide as the gallery itself. She stood in the studio, taking in the light, and whispered, "This is the biggest thing that's ever happened to me." Her hands shook as she unpacked her brushes. I showed her where the best light fell in the mornings, where Grandpa kept extra canvases. Watching her reminded me of who I'd been, nervous, hopeful, desperate for a place to belong. I smiled, offering quiet encouragement, feeling a deep sense of purpose take root, fragile but determined. Later, as dusk painted the city in shades of gold and blue, I stood at the penthouse window, clutching Grandpa's fountain pen for luck. Below, Boston shimmered, a grid of lights, endless stories unfolding in rooms just like this one. For the first time, I let myself believe I might actually be steering this legacy somewhere new. Just as the confidence began to settle, my assistant buzzed in from the front desk. "Ashley, the gallery's biggest donor wants to schedule an urgent meeting. Tomorrow morning. She says it can't wait." The news sent a fresh shiver through me. Change always comes with resistance, sometimes from the people you least expect. I closed my eyes, letting the weight of the day settle in my bones. Power wasn't armor. It was a test, a chance to shape the story, even while everyone else was watching for me to stumble. Tomorrow, I'd find out who was really ready to stand with me. For now, the city lights and the scratch of Grandpa's pen were enough. The gallery's future hung on one conversation in a glass-walled boardroom, high above Boston's rain-laced skyline. Even before I stepped into the room, I could feel the tension, a knot in my chest, a warning in the way the staff avoided my gaze that morning. The city below blurred beneath the storm, and the rhythmic tapping of rain on the windows set the tempo for the hardest meeting of my life. Mr. Whitaker stood at my side, calm as ever, a quiet anchor in a sea of nervous energy. The board sat in a tight semicircle, their faces turned toward Ms. Graves, our largest donor, who perched at the head of the table with a polished calm that hid the threat beneath. Ms. Graves wasted no time. "Ashley, I've always supported the Miller Gallery, for tradition, for excellence. But your new programs," she slid a folder toward me. "Residencies for unknown artists, community events? That's not the legacy we funded. If you continue down this path, I'll have to reconsider my support." The words were soft, but the implication struck like thunder. I glanced at the faces around the table, some worried, some calculating, a few quietly hopeful. The oldest board member, Mr. Rowan, cleared his throat. "Perhaps there's a compromise," he said. "We could focus on more established artists. Scale back, keep our standards high." A younger member, Samantha, hesitated before speaking. "Ashley's changes brought in a new crowd last week. It's the most energy this place has had in years. Maybe it's time we risked something." They looked to me, the storm outside echoing the one inside my head. Grandpa's words floated up from memory, "Build what lasts, not what pleases. Be brave, even if you're alone." My hands shook under the table. I steadied them with Grandpa's fountain pen, feeling its familiar weight. I met Ms. Graves' gaze. "I respect what you've done for this gallery. But I can't lead by fear of losing funding. Art doesn't grow if we only repeat what's safe. My grandfather believed in building something that lasts, even if it makes people uncomfortable. I have to do the same." The silence that followed was sharp and brittle. Ms. Graves' face hardened. "Then you'll have to do it without me." She stood, gathering her papers. The boardroom seemed to shrink as she walked to the door, heels clicking with finality. "I hope you know what you're doing, Ashley." She left. Rain hammered the glass as the door shut behind her. For a moment, no one moved. The boardroom felt like a stage after the last curtain, uncertain whether to clap or cry. Mr. Whitaker broke the silence, his voice warm with quiet approval. "That took courage. Walter would be proud." The board looked to me, some with resignation, others with new respect. I sat straighter, the fear in my chest giving way to a trembling sense of relief. I'd done it, stood my ground, even as everything I'd built seemed to hang in the balance. The gallery was truly mine now, for better or worse. As the meeting broke up, I lingered by the window, watching the city blur into watercolor through the rain. Mr. Rowan patted my shoulder on the way out. "You'll need new allies now, Ms. Miller. But maybe that's not such a bad thing." Later that evening, as I worked late in my office, my phone chimed with a bank notification. At first, I thought it was a mistake, the number too large to be routine. But the details were clear, an anonymous wire transfer, covering Ms. Graves' entire annual pledge. I read the message again, heart pounding. No sender, just a note field, for the future. Keep building. My hand shook as I opened the gallery's old mailbox and found a single envelope, my name in a slanting hand. Inside, a note on thick paper: "Art finds its own champions. W." I let out a breath I hadn't known I was holding. Maybe it was a coincidence, or maybe some hidden friend of Grandpa's still watched from afar. Whoever it was, their faith steadied me. The storm had passed, at least for tonight, and in the quiet I felt something close to hope. I looked out over the city, the rain finally easing, and whispered a quiet thank you. The gallery lights glowed warm against the darkness. For the first time I believed, truly believed, that I could build something that lasted. A year later, the gallery's walls are alive with stories, some my own, but more and more, they belong to others. Young artists, visitors, neighbors, children from the community center, all have left a trace in the halls of what is now Harper Light Gallery. The spring sunlight pours through the tall windows, casting patterns on polished wood floors where the echo of last night's celebration still lingers. The air smells of paint, coffee, and hope. It's hard to believe how much can change in 12 months. The nervous energy of my first night has faded, replaced with an easy confidence that seems to hum in every corner. The residency is thriving. Artists have come from as close as Cambridge and as far as New Mexico, their canvases, and photographs and sculptures lining the walls with fresh voices. The staff, once wary, now greet me with genuine warmth. Laughter drifts from the office where Mrs. Jenkins coaches the newest intern on the finer points of running a gallery event. Even the board meetings, while never easy, are filled with debate and curiosity rather than suspicion. As I walk the floor, I pause by a bright, abstract piece painted by a 17-year-old from Dorchester. Her mother stands nearby, eyes shining with pride, and when the girl spots me she nearly beams out of her shoes. I think of myself at that age, so certain of what I wasn't, so unsure of what I could be. Now I get to be the one who unlocks doors, who says yes when others hesitate. Lucas sent a letter last week. The envelope was thick, his handwriting as careful as ever. He wrote of regrets, of seeing things too late, of wanting to build a new kind of relationship, even if it meant starting from scratch. He ended simply, "I'm proud of you. Dad would have been too, in his own way. I hope we can talk soon." There was a bouquet on my desk this morning, lilies and daffodils in a blue glass vase. No note, just the florist's card with Mom's name typed on the order. A silent olive branch, but it softened something in me. For now, that was enough. Mr. Whitaker stopped by in a crisp linen suit, a rare smile breaking through his stoic exterior. He handed me a small box, a paperweight, inscribed, "To Ashley Miller, who built what lasts." "Congratulations," he said. "Your grandfather would have been over the moon." The team insisted on a staff photo under the new Harper Light Gallery sign. We posed together, arm in arm, the young artists squeezed in among us. There was confetti in my hair, and I didn't care. Later, as the anniversary party wound down, I gathered the new cohort of residents in the main hall. Their faces were bright with possibility and nerves, the same cocktail I used to carry everywhere. I told them, no one else gets to define your worth. You get to decide what your story means. I saw them breathe easier at that, and I hoped they'd remember it when things got hard. At the center of the gallery, in a place of honor, hung the $10 check. Framed in walnut, it sat beneath a photograph of Grandpa, young, camera in hand, eyes full of quiet mischief. The plaque below read, "Sometimes the smallest inheritance is the greatest test." Value, priceless. Visitors lingered there, reading, wondering, sometimes leaving their own notes tucked behind the frame. As the last guests trickled out and the city settled into evening, I stood before that exhibit alone. My journey, pain and joy, fear and triumph, was reframed, no longer a punchline, but a kind of compass. Grandpa's final letter, which I kept in my pocket, echoed in my mind, "You were always the legacy I believed in." The gallery doors stayed open late that night, just as Grandpa used to leave them, for anyone searching for a little light. A few passers-by wandered in, drawn by the warmth and the laughter still lingering in the air. The world outside was uncertain, but within these walls, something had taken root and begun to bloom. As I turned out the lights, I paused by the entrance, watching the reflection of the gallery in the glass, a mosaic of new faces, old dreams, and endless possibility. I found myself smiling, a little wistful, a little. Looking around the gallery filled with new faces and old dreams, I realized that true legacy isn't about what we inherit, but the hope we nurture in each other. My journey has taught me that sometimes the smallest gestures, a kind word, an open door, can light the way for others, even when the world is slow to understand. In the end, what matters most is the courage to define our own worth and the compassion we show along the way. If this story has touched you, I invite you to share your own experiences or reflections, because our stories are what truly connect us.